to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf, and today our special guest is Chuck Loebbaka. He is a retired journalist and author of Fate, the last of his crime noir trilogy. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, last time we met, you were on your first book, Love and Death in Paris.
Yes.
You've been busy.
I keep writing, yes.
So since then, you've written Paris Orphan, and now Fate is your last of your crime noir trilogy.
That's three of the Paris trilogies.
And with your leading character, mostly Detective Jack Lamont.
He's in 5 of the 6 books, yeah, as a main character. That's correct, yes.
So, but this is before his post-war life, right? This is
Yes,
kind of a prequel.
Yes. He's a detective, and then during that time period, he goes to France. He's writing for the Tribune. They send him to France. And that became the genesis for Love and Death in Paris. He's in France, 1939, on the eve of World War II.
Yes, very dramatic moment. And since this book is about fate, his fate brings him to meet Hannah.
That is correct, yes. That would be book 2, that's Paris Orphan. Hannah's parents are taken from their home and imprisoned. They're sent to the Drancy Detention Center, which was a holding place before Jews were shipped to Poland. So she's an orphan, Paris Orphan. And Jack is hiding from the Nazis and the French police at the school where she is being cared for by nuns. The nuns actually had a school where they protected these Jewish kids.
Yes.
But the Nazis would come and track him down. So Jack has to leave and get out of Paris. They're after him. She's afraid she's going to get taken. They're already taking kids from the orphanage where she's working, where she's living, and she's afraid she's going to get captured too and sent to Drancy. So they leave together, and they head to the south of France. And that takes us to the conclusion of Paris Orphan, where she's in a very safe place, run by, of all people, the Red Cross of Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And they weren't supposed to do that. The female Red Cross ladies did it anyway, despite the objections of the Home Office. Yes. They saved all the Jewish kids, including Hannah. That's accurate. That actually happened.
True. That is the actual truth.
Yeah. Actually, one of the students who was living there at the same time as Hannah, in the story, lived in Wilmette.
No way.
Yeah, I talked to him briefly.
Wow.
Yeah.
But we have also interviewed a couple of stories from World War II survivor children's in our children in our program. So that's a very interesting piece of history that we are part of.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot, and the Illinois Holocaust Museum has programs about some of these surviving family members who will talk and give, have conversations with you. So anyone who has interest in this topic should go to the Illinois Holocaust Museum.
Yes.
It's in Skokie, near Old Orchard. Mm-hmm. Been there a couple times for my research too.
So tell us about why you picked this topic. It's about the French resistance during the Holocaust years. Right?
Yes, that is in the Fate version, the 3rd novel. I learned about this basically starting in 2008. My middle son was transferred to Paris. So he, his wife, and the 2 twins, who were 5, were there, and I went to visit for a week. I ran around the city, took the metro, saw the highlights, read the International Herald Tribune to see what's going on in town, went back for another week in 2009. And in all of this, I was picking up this information basically about the French resistance, the Nazi occupation of France. So my 3 books that began in Paris really evolved from that. Did a lot of research. Met a author who writes about French mysteries also at the Glenview Library. She talked there. So that's what started my interest in the French occupation by the Germans, something I never knew, was never taught in high school, never read about in college. So this is like a major research project.
Yes, I understand the because of historical fiction, there's a ton of research that went behind your work.
extensive research. Books, movies, books from the library, DVDs I rented, looked, and just a lot of research. Probably almost half the time is the research, since I don't know where I was starting at nothing, basically.
Yes.
I didn't know about the French occupation. I knew the Germans were there, but I didn't know the details.
Yes, and then what kind of resistance movement and the children? Tell us about what you found out about the children.
The children. Part of my research led me to find a book called The French Children in the Holocaust. It was produced and written by Serge Klarsfeld and his wife Beata, who became known as the Nazi hunters.
All right.
They not only did this, they actually tracked down Nazis who were guilty of war crimes and got them turned in and put to trial.
Wow.
So there's this massive book that they produce. It's about this thick, 8 by 10 roughly, about that thick. It weighs a ton. It's also online. People want to look it up, they can find it. So there are pictures of all these children who were murdered.
Oh.
It's just ghastly. And that is why I dedicated this third book, Fate, to the children. And I actually dedicated it to a family. These are the children I dedicated it to. It's very appropriate. The oldest girl here is the same age as my main character in the third book.
I see.
Born the same year. And she had these siblings. She had 2 daughters and a little baby boy. And he was 5 months old when they deported the whole family to Poland. So that was appropriate and symbolic of what went on.
Yes.
Something I never knew about how many children and who they were. This book, this huge book, has everything. Their ages, their birth date, their birthplace, where they were in prison, when they got shipped out, what cattle car they were on.
Really?
It's a massive document.
Wow.
So if anybody wants to research this in more detail,
And look up
it's
people,
online.
Yeah, and look up people who they may know.
Yeah.
And this was, how many children are we talking about?
6,000 were deported from the detention center in Drancy, which was just outside Paris. That's part of my books too. That was the major holding center, the waiting area to get shipped onto cattle cars to Poland. So the Muslim came from there. And about 1/3 of them were actually French citizens. 2/3 were foreigners who had moved to France because it was a safer place for Jews at the time, but before the time.
Before.
And
They
the
were
girl who was
deported
in
as well.
my last 2 books, Hannah, I picked her as a character. She was born in Belarus, Russia, moved with her family to Paris, and was caught up in the deportations.
At that time, yes, Paris was a very international city.
It was. They welcomed Jews. I was surprised, but they did until the Nazis came in and it all died, you know.
Yes. And it's very interesting that you wrote about Hannah, or this girl who would have lived as your main character.
Yeah, Hannah survives. She survives into my book Fate, and she goes to Israel. And she's there for the supposed division between Palestine into Jewish and Arab.
Oh, yes.
And the Arabs turned down the division of 2 states that rejected that. So this follows Hannah through that year and then on beyond that to meet a person she happens to have met in the last chapter of Fate. German girl.
So this is now beyond the Holocaust, another hugely historical significant event is what happened to Israel, the establishment of Israel.
Yeah, Hannah goes to, there is a children's school and center in France. She got there, and she was still, I think, 12 at the time, and then she makes her way with friends to Palestine.
Wow.
In the town outside of Paris, and survives the war and the fights, and becomes a freedom fighter, so to speak. Yeah, yes.
And your detective, Jack Lamont, he is very much part of the third book as well.
Not so much, no. As there's a passing reference, because it became Hannah's story.
Yes.
Hannah was the main character in the second book, Paris Orphan, so this is a continuation of her story. The couple of reviews I had of the book, people really liked Hannah and thought great character, so I kept
So
her.
you have to develop
I
her.
still like her. Yeah, she's a good character. Yeah.
Well, those characters grow with you, right? Let's talk about, so you have another series, another 3 books that you are working on to make them into a trilogy.
Yes, those are 3 crime noir stories. Those books were my first venture into writing novels. There were 3 of them. The first one was Darlin.
Mm-hmm.
She was an identical twin who hired my detective Jack Lamont to follow her troubled sister. 1955.
Nice dramatic setup, yes.
The next book is Sparrow, 1958. And Jack comes into her life and she thinks she had a baby, but she's not sure because there's no baby around. And then she goes on and comes back to town, and Jack is going to help her find her baby, if it indeed lived.
So
That's the second book.
what a mystery.
Third book is Lola, totally different character. It's Jack finds her being almost run over by a car and rescues her, and she has no memory. Doesn't know who she is, doesn't know where she lived, doesn't know what happened to her, why would people want to kill me? And so he unravels that mystery by the end of the book.
Oh, those are all very exciting.
So the titles are, Darlin, Sparrow, nickname basically, and Lola. They are based on a lot of my experience as a newspaper reporter. My first job out of college was for the Chicago Heights Star newspaper. I covered Chicago Heights out of college. Very nice, and they hired me right away. And I covered not only the city council, the plan commission, the zoning board, all the elements of the city, Chicago Heights. And I covered the police. I learned about the police and how they operated. I learned about the syndicate and knew them, covered them too. So that really was how my writing about that
Chicago
time
area.
period and the film noir really, or crime noir, really evolved. And it was an interesting experience. And
You don't need to do as much research.
no,
You already know.
no, I have memories from what happened when I was there. There was when the policeman had the lug nuts removed from his car, and he almost crashed because the wheel fell off. That kind of thing. And I better stop. There are people still alive who may have committed some crimes. So.
I see.
But that experience, just absorbing all that, and I moved to Glenview, of course, became editor of the Glenview announcements, and there was not that kind of crime.
So now that you're ready with your books, what are some marketing plans do you have?
Well, I'm still exploring that. Amazon has an option for advertising, looking at that. I have a Facebook page. I will probably do something with my books on the Facebook page.
And you have a website too.
I have a website too.
But initially you weren't planning on the marketing of the books.
No, I really wrote it just because I've been a writer my whole life. I mean,
Yes.
this was something I wanted to do. It wasn't a money-making venture, just to, write what I hope would be good stories to read. That was the only purpose I really had in doing all this.
They're very suspenseful reading. I enjoy reading.
Thank you.
And this idea that, yes, not preparing for marketing, but that seems to be the next step.
Yes, it will be. I'll make some effort in that. I'm not in this to make money. That's not the point. Just hoping to write better as I go along. I started back when I was a junior in high school. Haven't stopped writing since, so
Yes.
I will keep writing.
Yes, and then there's fun to share what you write on its own. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. I gave some books away, of course, and some other people read my books out of the library. So it's gotten some readership, which is fine,
And you got feedback. How is this on your Facebook that you got feedback from readers?
Pardon me?
You say you have some feedback from readers. Is
Yeah,
it through
not
Facebook?
not on my webpage. It's just messages and phone calls and emails to me. That's all.
And that must be satisfying.
Yeah, it is.
I hear that, well, that is something very new, I think, for authors now, that you can actually hear what people comments are right away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in itself is a social side of book writing that we didn't really have before.
I think that happens in a lot of it you don't know about. I have a neighbor friend who happened to know a woman. He said, "Do you know so-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah, a long time ago." Turns out she still lives in Glenview. I knew her from the 1960s when I was editor of the Glenview announcements, and she was a young woman. And she's still here.
Wow.
And she takes my books out of the library.
Oh, that's
Small
wonderful.
world.
Yes.
Yes.
Now we're going to talk about your life in Glenview. You've been a resident since the 1960s. Tell us how Glenview used to be and how has it changed?
Yes, we moved here in 1964 while I was editor of the Glenview announcements. It was about 18,000 people then, and there was this political battle.
Yeah, that's about
political battle going on. There were two parties. One was the sort of entrenched party, had been there for a long time. The village president had been Jack Mabley, famous Chicago Daily News columnist. Then this Glenview caucus group evolved, and there was this big fight. And I walked into the 1964 election. We lived near Elm Central, so during the Vietnam War, the hospital planes would fly over our house on the way to the Glenview Naval Air Station.
Oh.
So Elm Central, we were walking distance for the boys, our three boys, to go to Hoffman School.
Okay.
They just walked through Owen Park and went to school.
Hoffman, that's where we are. And how about the hospital? When did Glenbrook Hospital came?
I think I was on the village board at the time. I became a trustee.
Yes, I remember.
For Glenview from 73 to 83. It was during that time period, the village president, there was a need to have another major hospital facility out this way. Edison was fine, but crowded.
Yes.
So that hospital system was looking for a place out here. The problem was Lake Avenue. There was no underpass at Lake Avenue.
Okay.
And if you're taking patients to the hospital west of Lake Avenue and you get a freight train running for miles, you're in trouble.
I see.
So through the work of the village president, they got the underpass built, and that's how you can get to Glenbrook Hospital easy now.
My, that's very interesting.
So there's that. And there was zoning issues and flooding issues, and this was a town that was really developing to emerge as a full sister to the North Shore, older North Shore towns like Evanston, Winnetka, Wilmette.
Mm-hmm.
And it grew and became a very good town in its own right.
Yes.
So it was a growth. Major growth went, I think we're 44,000 now. Glenview?
Yes, I think we're definitely
so
more than
18,000 was comfy.
Yes.
It was different lifestyle. We let the kids, the three boys, run the neighborhood.
Yes.
We left doors open sometimes.
Yeah.
You can't do that now.
No.
But back then in the 60s we did, and everybody did fine. So.
Probably very little traffic as well.
Very little traffic, yeah.
And you met some writers through the Glenview connections.
Yes.
Through a writers group, was it?
Well, there's a writers group that I was invited to join. It's a group that meets every first Monday of the month at Myers Tavern in Glenview. They're all retired print journalists like I was.
Yes.
They work for the Sun-Times, the Tribune, AP, and Crane Chicago Business. So these are retirees who were actual journalists who were in the field and are retired. So we get together and we exchange memories and mourn the loss of the good newspapers we used to work for.
Yes, yes. But it's such a big difference, isn't it, from writing fast and writing for a certain number of words and then going to writing a novel or
Yeah, you're right.
The pleasure of writing something longer.
Very different. At the announcement, my whole newspaper career was always on deadline.
Yes.
You got to meet the deadline. You got to get the story written. You got to get it edited. You can't miss the deadline.
It has to be short.
Yeah.
So now writing, what is the, how is it for you to change over to write something longer?
Well, I got the idea about trying to write for myself as I neared retirement. I was going to retire at some point, just wasn't sure. Turned out to be September 2009. So I left Northwestern after 27 years, and I couldn't stop writing, as I said. I read books, how do you write fiction, and learn how you do that, and just started writing away at the computer. And hopefully they came out okay. But yeah, it's a whole different kind of writing. Yeah, the newspaper writing, and even at Northwestern, we were producing news releases. So you're writing stories that are 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, who,
Yes.
what, where, when, basically straightforward. Not the creative part of writing very much, on occasion, but not much. So that's the big difference, I think. What I would call straight, factual type writing to creative, make it up stories.
Yes. Well, do you have a year for listening for dialogue?
How to listen for dialogue?
Yes. Do you write this just from talking to yourself, or do you actually sit in a coffee shop and hear people talk?
Yeah.
How do you write dialogue? It's hard.
I describe voices and physical characteristics of my characters. And I try to make them as close on to what I have seen or heard. And some of the characters have a very definite style of talking. So that's part of the book too. And so you make it all up. It's you draw from your life, the people you know, the people you have read about, the people you see on TV and movies, and you package it into characters, and they're all new. I mean, these people did not exist until I wrote them.
Yes.
So
Well,
it's a challenge. It's all creative in your head.
you sure have a lot of stories to tell. Well, thank you, Chuck, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the offer. Thank you.
And thank you. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.